Good afternoon, morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Carolyn Wood, and I'm very happy today to be able to present to you Maria Claudia Parias. I'm going to read a little bit about Maria Claudia because it's an extraordinary, I can say career, but the reality is it's an extraordinary life that she lives in dedication to the way that music weaves into the human condition and brings about change. So first of all, welcome Maria Claudia, and then I'll introduce you. Thank you for being with us.
Muchas gracias, Caroline. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you for this invitation to the festival, to the organizers, Angelica, and everyone that is a part of this team, and this crazy thing that's doing a music festival in the middle of the Andes of Chile.
Maria, the way we're going to do this is that I understand Spanish pretty well. I can speak it more or less, but Maria Claudia's, her storytelling and her detail is all in Spanish. So I'm going to speak in English most of the time, and Maria Claudia is going to speak in Spanish because she understands me well, I understand her. So you're going to get the chance to traverse across different languages. So Maria Claudia Parias is the executive president of Fundación Nacional Batuta, and we'll hear more about that in the conversation. She's a social communicator and journalist, specialist in cultural management, and she has a master's degree in cultural administration from the University of Barcelona. Maria Claudia has extensive experience in the cultural field and in the design and implementation of social projects at a local, national, and international level. She's worked as Director of Regional Promotion at the Ministry of Culture. She's as the General Director of the Philharmonic Orchestra of Bogotá, Director of Cultural Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Technical Assistant at the Department of Arts of the André Bello's Covenant, Director of the International Arts Journal, which is a Revista Arte Internacional, of the Bogotá Museum of Modern Art. She's been the Communication Advisor of the Department of Arts at the Ministry of Culture and advisor to various cultural projects in Colombia. Currently, she's a member of the Executive Board of the International Music Council, the IMC, and member of the International Society for the Performing Arts, which is ISPA in New York, plus many, 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 many projects along the way. So a huge, warm welcome, Maria Claudia. And I think our time together today is just enough to open the lid of, this topic.
Muchas gracias, Caroline. Gracias por la lectura.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for the reading of my professional background and that kindness and those beautiful words around of a trajectory, my trajectory.
To begin by putting a little context of how you came to be someone so completely immersed in the world of, yes, music, but it's been a bigger trajectory than just music. It's the arts, and also the whole area of social change. And I love this idea that you're a communicator as well as someone who knows the power of the arts. So you're able to get the message across. But it began when you were really young, right?
Sí,
you were,
es correcto. Yo desde muy chiquita siempre mi mamá.
Since I was really young, my mom studied the arts and my father was a doctor.
Entonces él era de este tipo de personas. Mi abuela, la mamá de.
My doctor, he was a kind of doctor that liked music. My grandmother liked music. My mother studied piano. So cultural and artistic topics were always present in my family life. But since I was really young, I would go to the school and I was very studious. I'd do my homework. So I'd try to finish early to go to a cultural center near my house. It was called the White Wall. And this is a cultural center where you could hear lectures about topics that had to do with contemporary culture or the history of civilization. You could also take art classes. So since I was very young, I was associated
cultural en Bogotá,
with cultural topics in Bogota, with the story of culture, with music and arts. And I think that was important in my foundation, my upbringing. That's why when I decided to study journalism, as I started as a intern in the newspaper here, I I was an intern in the cultural section of the newspaper. So I would cover the cultural events every day, arts, and in general also of big cultural events in Colombia. I discovered that what I wanted to do was a kind of cultural administrator.
Before we move into the historia cultural, because that's really where the sort of big part of your career is set and your life's work. I had a question just occurred to me. As a journalist focusing on arts and culture, I wonder how can you tell us? I don't know if this is possible, right? But can you let us see in through your eyes when you would look at a piece of artistic offering or cultural installation in the society? What are you looking at? How are you looking at it as someone who comes from journalism, which is about social communication, really about, so how do you see the world of the arts and culture in connection with society as a journalist?
Una pregunta muy interesante. Bueno, en primer
Very
lugar,
interesting question. Let's say my proximity to the products and the creative process has to do selfishly with my own awe. All these artifacts that constitute the universe creation are made to move you and to generate reflection about yourself, about the purpose of your life in society, and also about the meaning of the world in general. So it has a value beyond the aesthetic, but also it's political. And that's how I see the creation and the power that art has to transform, to tell, to talk about the meaning of things. And a little the homework that I did in through my work as a journalist was that of narrating how I can interpret these things against the light of social issues, political issues around the time where these artistical things were happening. So, for example, I had to talk about art exposition from a logic that didn't have to do with a critical logic. The critical logic is what was wrong, because what are the parameters to determine whether something is bad or something is wrong? That topic is very complicated in the sense that not there are so many different ways to receive a message through the arts, and there are different possibilities of interpreting a message. So my homework as a journalist was very fun because it wasn't a critical homework. It was to be a narrator. I like this phrase, this quote from Herman Reis, who said that when you do this kind of this documentation of texts that reflect cultural topics. He feels like an accountant in ruin. I feel like the mediation and communication is enough to maybe reflect the greatness of what can be an artistic creation. It's a mediator's job, a very important mediator's job.
I'm going to switch, I'm sure, in Spanglish.
Por
Fascinante.
favor.
No, it's interesting. I just read a book called Cassandra Speaks, and the subtitle is When Women Are the Storytellers, the Stories Change. And I think what you're saying is, in many ways, very similar. It's not about critiquing. It's not about being an art critic. It's about trying to go into that world to understand what is the experience of the artist in the expression, and what is the message, and how can we, as receivers of the message, be open to receive. So it's like you start to weave open the story, kind of peel it open, so people can look in rather than say, oh, it's good or it's bad, which is, if we look at what's been happening in the United States, all over the world, the division is getting wider and wider because people just like what they like and they don't like what they don't like.
Frente a lo que estás diciendo, que es muy interesante.
And what you're saying is very important. It's interesting. It's also, it's important to highlight how art makes you question things. And sometimes people don't want to be questioned. They're afraid to understand what it is that this creative piece is proposing in terms of the way of how you are, how you relate with others, for example. So the world, when it turns black and white, which is a little that I feel has been happening in the last couple years in a few countries like the US, they lose texture and they lose the possibility of expand and contract ideas that I think is something so fundamental to progress in the understanding
más cargado de sentido en la sociedad.
Things should be more charged with meaning in society. So when we go into topics like art and the social transformation, or music and social transformation, this is when open people who are sensible, they find a way of life that's very important for them.
Because throughout history, it's more often than not been the artist that's had to be sacrificed in the world of politics as well, to stand for and speak the truth, and sometimes highly provocative because it needed to be shaken, and sometimes much more sort of soft and covert, coming in under the radar but shaking the internal world and the society through something more beautiful. But it's the role of the artist very often that is just the way they see what needs to be seen, and they've got a way of saying it that can be heard.
Totalmente de acuerdo. Así es.
I absolutely agree.
The poem yesterday from Amanda Gorman at the inauguration of President Biden. Beautiful, young, amazing young poet doing her poetry. So,
sí.
Okay, so tell us about your journey in Colombia, because one thing that was really striking for me was when we met, that you said it's the longest, the country that has endured the longest living state of war, and the impact of that. And so when you starting to look at reconciliation, how do the arts work in a culture, in a people that have been traumatized without stop and are at war, have been at war with each other? So please take us into the world of Colombia and your participation over the years in that, because it's fascinating.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Caroline. Sí,
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, the way what you're saying, Colombia in the West, it's the country that's has had for the longest time a conflict since the peace treaty from a few years ago. But that inner conflict is a conflict that left 8 million direct victims between dead people, disappeared people, hunted people, um, people that have had to flee. So the conflict in Colombia is very complex, and what we see in the media is about drug trafficking, and we have the most known negative image around the world, and obviously the conflict, the topic of conflict is a story very well known. A British person wrote in a column, he said when he arrived to Colombia, he thought he was going to write a encyclopedia about the Colombian conflict. When I spent a month, I said, no, maybe I'll just write a book. When I spent a year and a half in Colombia, I thought maybe I wasn't even able to write a column because it's a conflict that is born from the polarization around the idea of the communism and non-communism in the world.
Consideran digamos, que hay una vía armada que puede ser.
And there, we think that there's a life that to be armed is the way to create a life in society and to create justice and inequality. So these things were complex, and through so many years and the exercise of the internal war. So the initial objectives were distorted. The philosophies surrounded the projects in the beginning. And in Colombia, we're living very difficult times, especially when they began to relate themselves with the drug trafficking. And as you know, the great drug lords were born in this country in the 90s. It was very common
bombas gigantescas
that we would be bombed just around the streets. They would explode. This isn't the story of other people in the world. But when I go to the movies and I see Al Capone, well, it was pretty much the same. And I'm not saying that to create to make you reflect about the specificity about Colombian history, but rather to reflect around how this human condition that leads to the extremes has consequences in the integral development of communities. And this is where a project like Music for the Reconcile, which is a super important project by the foundation in Colombia and who has received support from the Ministry of Culture, has played an important role. This is a project that was born in 1991 by the government, and it was inspired in the Venezuelan system. The maestro Jose Antonio Abrior was an important link to this project in Colombia. But what happens? The model precedes the system cannot be textually or exactly replicated in other geographic historical contexts. So what I think that the system in Colombia adapted itself into a really brilliant way. So they knew how to find the musicians and people who come together to bring this project to life. It involved a lot of victims of the conflict, people who had to flee, people who had suffered directly. And then the consequences of that obviously is a war. So there's a psychosocial component. which is strategic to the project, and a great emphasis was
musical,
made
coros, y
to
no
make
tanto
assemblies of a chorus, not necessarily great or orchestras, symphonic orchestras, but rather produce musicians that could enter the. It was a project that looked to work on the the social fabric. It was more humanitarian, considering that we were in the middle of a war and it wasn't easy to create musical centers in the middle of those conditions. So a lot of musicians, when they tell the story,
que hay muchos lugares a donde solamente llegaban las dos Bs, y las dos Bs son Batuta con la música y Bavaria con la cerveza. Entonces Bavaria es la marca de
the
cerveza.
baton. So there are places they would go with the baton and bear, and the
Una penetración territorial impresionante, una
Batuta has a presence
claramente la práctica
where clearly the practice of music isn't just possibility that children incorporate music to their formation, but also the possibility of them to create social consciousness, social fabric in middle of the vulnerability, social vulnerability and difficulty.
I mean, it's so, I'm sure it was or it has been over the years, a challenge to bring a summary of something that is so far reaching, that has a long history, that many, many, many layers, and to bring it into a summary like that. And the effort, I think, on our part is not to go, oh, check, now we understand Colombia, because it's just it's an extraordinary example, really, of something that is healing. And there's many things that we could talk about there, but I guess I want to just look at that very interesting thing about the social change and personal change, because you're talking about something that, yes, people need to feel that they're part of, and that they can, the beautiful metaphor of orchestral music, that all different notes and different instruments and people from different places all sitting in the same thing with one piece of music, creating something that is one. And as our guest said yesterday, Sherto Gill, said it's amazing because music doesn't tell you that there's not conflict. Music will show you also there's conflict in the notes. But it sits there. Everyone can sit with that, and it resolves, but you go through it. And I wonder, this idea that, a country that is traumatized, that doesn't even know what that is because they've been living in the trauma for 50 years. So you're working with children, and those children, I'm sure, influence their parents as well. So they're experiencing something of beauty from the inside and the outside. Have you done any studies that show the impact of working with children with music and how it impacts society, their families and their communities?
Sí, hay muchos estudios que se han hecho sobre.
Yeah, there are many studies that we've done through the effects of the baton and the musical formation in the Colombian context. There are also a lot of theses written by different universities about these reflective exercises, for example, from the UN, from Benud, where they analyze what happens with the musical education and the integral development of the society through music. So one thing is to create a space where the children who are vulnerable, who come from very precarious situations have a right to music. One thing is to think of it from them to have a right to music, from the public politics to culture to the politics of be able to develop creative and critical thinking, to consider it like a right, a fundamental right as a human being. That's one issue. But there's a study very important that was done about the psychosocial development that musical promotes in context of social vulnerability. And these results were very interesting. They worked in the Department of Planning in Colombia. They determine in terms of personal dimension and interpersonal dimension. That means the relationship with the child and his environment. What changes or where are there positive effects of that musical formation? And clearly they discovered, they could see that the variables that they established had to do with how the child's self-esteem was elevated. Children who were able to play a musical instrument, working in a team, in the school. These are children that feel like they belong to something, that they're part of something meaningful, valuable, but they also feel very satisfied with of playing music for themselves. So self-esteem is something that improved. The topic of regulating their emotions, because we also have issues of mental illness, depression, anxiety, and music has been studied by many academics, and it's confirmed that it helps regulate the emotions in people by the tranquility, the harmony, the idea to from thinking to a problem to connect to music. It creates that balance. Another thing that they saw, and this is interesting, then the kids said that they felt happy, is happiness. So when I think about that, I think that Reutan, it wasn't too crazy when he created the happiness index. So how do we live the development, the society development from happiness? So the kids that studied baton, the variable highly rated was that everyone felt happy. They felt the sense of happiness when they were playing. They would forget about their problems, their issues. They would respect the people that knew more than them. They would work together with their team. So there are these moments where children are alone because these are times when they're not in school or they're not with their parents because their parents are in situations of high risk. So the musical center and the musical practice became this space of happiness for them. And the mental abilities that musical develops. So kids that study baton, we realize that there are moments that it help them improve their understanding of math, of English, of communication. And one other thing we also saw is the aspirational topic. When a kid joins part of a group, of an orchestra or a chorus, they feel like they belong, but also that eventually he can become, or he or she can become a professional musician. So Batuta has been around for quite some time. And many of the children that have gone through Batuta are now part of the geography of musicians in Colombia, professional musicians in Colombia, and some obviously even are part of orchestras in Europe, US, and other parts of the world. So for a child from a vulnerable situation and social standing, to think that they can become a famous musician is something that inspires them and helps them to focus in the idea of achieving a transformation in their life. And from the point of view of the interpersonal aspect, which is also very important, it has to do with the family relationship that you mentioned. So if so the relationship with their parents improve because parents respect children that play an instrument and they're proud of that child. So in Batuta, which is the organization, the the recitals is a big important part of this because imagine we had like a get together, a gathering of food between these these children. And so when the recital comes, when the concert comes, you see the parents. It's like, this is my child's moment. This is my child's recital. And even though they don't have money, they don't have what they need, they would find food from somewhere. They would bring empanadas, even though they don't have a camera. They would borrow a video camera from someone to record that moment. And a really important aspect in the social aspect, it has to do with expanding your social network. So a lot of these children are displaced, and so they come to this place where they're welcome, and Bogota, the Medellin, they're big cities, so they come from these rural areas, from these towns to these cities. They feel like they don't belong.
Musicales han jugado un papel fundamental.
And so our musical centers play a fundamental role in this topic where children start to develop social relationships and start to make friends and where they feel like they belong.
From research that I've seen around addiction, drug addiction, that fundamental to being open to becoming an addict is the sense of not belonging to an ecosystem. That there's nothing in life that gives you joy. There's no connection. There's nothing to do. And it's a perfect entry for the narco traffic. So, you see the impact that has, not fighting narco traffic. It's just dissolving its need, from the ground up. Really beautiful.
Totalmente. Ahora, frente a lo que dices también.
Absolutely. And in regards of what you're saying, there isn't that much of a risk that the child will consume drugs, but in the Colombian case, it's about being recruited by the armed forces because these groups take the children away. So these illegal groups, these trafficking groups, what they need to control their territories. So they need to deinstitutionalize the territory. So they need kids to come and be part of their team. And obviously these kids come cheap. They're cheap labor. So what being part of this community is a prevention of forced recruitment to these forces. So you're contributing to that kid doesn't ever have to belong to those groups, those trafficking groups and so on. So the value is very high and important.
I'm remembering, in fact, the festival that we're in at the moment, the Portillo festival, that was the idea of Alejandra Urrutia for many, many years. She was her first work as a conductor was with a youth orchestra in the south of Chile. And this place was not known for anything other than alcoholism and poverty. If you said the name of the city, everyone just said, oh yeah, that's the city of, deep poverty or the village, whatever, of alcoholism. But today, when you say the name of the city, people go, oh, the youth orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
It completely transformed the city because of all you said, the orgullo, the pride in the family. Everybody sort of stepped up. The children lifted the whole kind of level of what was possible, and the families stepped up with that. So, and from that experience, that's when Ali, who was lucky enough and talented enough to do her studies in violin in Michigan and her postdoctoral there too. And she said, she was just immersed and she had so much opportunity that she wanted that level of opportunity would be available for young people from this region or from, Latin America. Mm-hmm. So, and yet, as you say, you couldn't just import el sistema because cultures are different, stories are different, histories are different. And I want to, in our little time that we have left, it's not so much to maybe tell me.
Passed by very quickly.
That something that you noticed was that all over the world, so let's move a little bit out from Colombia now, but in Colombia as well. So all over the world, there were these amazing cultural organizations that were bringing the magnificence of the arts, which, as you've explained so incredibly, are about human happiness. And it's like, when we cut the arts from funding, as soon as budgets are cut, the arts go, it means we don't value our happiness. We think, it's about economic. If we have money, we'll be happy, which, okay, it's another topic. But what I want to ask you is just to share a little bit about your when you peeled back the cover and you recognized that there were all these women sitting behind these organizations, and tell a little bit of that story, because I think that's fascinating too.
Claro, es que hace 5 años, cuando Batuta cumplió 25
5 years ago, when Batuta had 25 years of kind of existence, we organized a festival, and this year we're going to do the second part, so you guys are all invited to participate in this new seminar. So the seminar was so that we could identify valuable experiences in the transformation, the social transformation through music, not only based in the system, but also we had the first system was actually Chilean, and it was brought up in the 70s, and it brought up a very famous Chilean musician. But Latin America kind of developed from that. But there are many other ways in the world that have to do with the same idea, the same principle with the connection between social transformation and music. So there were these incredible stories, like the women from Rwanda with their drums. This was a group of women that became drummers after Rwanda, a genocide where all the men died. And the men are the only ones that had permission to play drums. So the women had to ask the government for permission to play the drums, because this was kind of a reconciliation to recognize that the genocide was one of the biggest stupidities in the contemporary world. And from a feminine point of view, surrounding the value of music as a form of communion. But there are many other experiences like this. For example, the National Institute of Music in Afghanistan that has this very famous musician, Ahmad Sarmast. It's incredible because in the middle of this war that in Afghanistan, everything that happens in the day-to-day of each one, with the Taliban that prohibit the practice of music, and also the link of women towards music, he creates this music institute that's full of girls, full of artistic directors, and of Afghan music. So he recovers the Afghan music and came to Colombia with a group of his musicians to celebrate with us the 25 years of Batuta. And I'd like to share in this festival the memories of the past seminar and the tips of information that are very short and moving. For example, the opera for homeless in London that comes from a very funny story. One of the directors of opera in London heard a comment from a politician in London that said it was so boring to leave the opera and see the homeless lying there on the street. And he thought creatively, the way the creatives think, that he was going to create an opera for homeless people. And he created it. And it's a super important project around the world for homeless people and artistic practices. So I'd like to share those experiences and offer that information from the Batuta Foundation and for that network that we're building, which is wonderful and marvelous. And I congratulate each one of you, Alejandra, Caroline, to want to work in networking and sharing knowledge, and that everyone can somehow support and validate the importance of art, especially to create a better world.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm sure that everyone listening will be just totally grateful to be able to enter and find those stories, and because the more that we tell the story, these stories, the more that kind of finds its way out into society, that people are able to kind of, I guess, excuse me, authorities have more data that they need to say, oh, okay, it's working. But also it gives courage, because I think if you think about those women in Afghanistan, the courage and the conviction that they must have to just keep moving forward. And that gives courage. In Chile, Angelica and I led a project in 2009 called My Courage, Your Courage, Mi Coraje, Tu Coraje. Mm-hmm. And it was working with, over 3,000 women during the year to tell a different story about the global financial crisis, to change the story from the media that was talking only about crisis and creating upheaval. And it was saying, no, we have courage. We get through things all the time. Women, we do that. So I think the more that we can tell the stories of courage and the magnificence of those results in the small and the large, then the more we will have people stepping up to listen to their own inner impulse and take action, like this festival, like Batuta, like the many things that are in your list of 50, which I'm sure is not a complete list. So please share them with us, and we will share them with the people. Maria Claudia, is there anything that you would like to offer as a sort of closing comment here? Because we could really keep going in many different directions and deeper as well. But we've come to the end of our time. So we have a few minutes, and I would love if you could share just some closing words. That would be wonderful.
Me parece muy importante.
I think it's very important to insist on the youngsters and that had the opportunity to arrive at the festival, to insist upon them.
Generar destrezas y habilidades técnicas en su
obviously to improve their technique, but the topic has to be accompanied by a reflection process of your consciousness to understand what can you do with this gift that is the gift of playing an instrument, of being a great musician that I'm sure there will be in the future. So I think it's very important to the way that you build yourself up as a musician, you should build yourself up as a person, and you have a higher social responsibility because you have a gift, and that ability is very important, that you can reflect upon yourselves consciously. It's not only a topic about shining in the music industry or becoming well known or famous or working in an orchestra, a well-known orchestra, but understanding that gift that you have, how can that be put into the service of society? I think that's very important, and I'm very happy that this festival opens up these spaces of debate, reflection, communication, and conversation around these topics. And thank you, obviously, Caroline, for your sweetness, your beautiful way of managing a conversation, for making so many wonderful things in your life as well.
Claudia, it's just, I can't believe we haven't known each other forever. It just seems like something we've done things together, and I look forward to doing and being together in the future, hopefully not just virtually, but it's been enriching for me to know much more about what it is that La Fundación Batuta is holding, because it is a space that they hold and are dedicated to. And I love your encouragement, and the students who are listening will think that I asked you to say that, because my part in the festival is exactly that. I do the coaching and leadership and how they can move beyond the limits of the past. And they always go, oh, we're just here for the music until it's necessary and they've experienced some value. So thank you for putting that. It's been just wonderful to have you here and to, have you bring your very practical wisdom and very big-hearted presence. So thank you so much.
Gracias a ustedes.
Angelica, Alejandra, and myself, just extremely grateful. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a ustedes tres y espero que terminen de tener un festival maravilloso. Ya saben que tienen en mí una aliada y en Batuta una entidad de apoyo y de confianza y cariño.
Yeah, well, and this we know because we've had
You always have my cooperation.
Years from Colombia that have been supported by Batuta. There's one young woman in Medellin especially who's just marvelous in all of the social area of work that you talk about. So yeah, great.
También logramos el apoyo de
We also have the support of other entities that are very important, so that the Philharmonic Orchestra of Bogota, the Philharmonic Orchestra of Colombia, among others. So I think that there's a famous politician in Colombia who was the mayor of Bogota, and he said, if everyone puts a piece in, everyone wins. So in the cultural, as I feel like there are tensions of people putting things and for some to shine more than others. But I'm convinced that if we can all put of ourselves, everyone will win.
No, this is the deeply feminine principle of Mother Earth, of La Pachamama.
Totalmente.
Everyone, if we all give. So that's beautiful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maria Claudia.
A ustedes. Muchas gracias.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
We're getting close to our time for the concert. So go and do what you need to do. Prepare yourself. Take the break that you need to take, and we'll see you in just a few minutes for the concert. Thank you very much.